Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra daf Kuf Lamed. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started at the Mishna at the top of the page. Ha'omer ish ploni yirasheni bimkom sheyesh bat. If a person says a different person, okay, and presumably we're talking about not just any random person, but a relative who theoretically could inherit like a brother or an uncle or something like that, will inherit me in a situation where he has daughters who should inherit. Or biti tirasheni bimkom sheyesh ben, or my daughter will inherit in a case where I have sons, where again the sons are supposed to inherit, not the daughter. If somebody says this, and we're speaking, if you remember, we already discussed that one can override by writing a will and explaining, I want to give this as a gift. Gift is okay, but here we have the language yirasheni, only the language of inheritance. If you do it in the language of inheritance, and you basically say, I want someone else to inherit me, even though they're in line to inherit you, lo amar klum. This is not relevant, what the person said. Shehitna mashkatu b'Torah, because this person, as we saw in the Mishnah previously, went against, made a condition, a stipulation against what the Torah said. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer, presumably Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka is disagreeing with the first opinion. That seems to be the basic structure, but the Gemara is going to actually deliberate about whether he agrees or disagrees, and says, Im amal al misha ra'oi liyorsho dvarav kayamim. If he said it about someone who can potentially inherit, now what does it mean potentially? Theoretically, he could be disagreeing with Tanakama and saying even a brother instead of the daughter, or even a daughter instead of the son. Or perhaps he's saying, if it's someone who is supposed to inherit, like a son, let's say there's 5 sons, and the person says, I want one son to inherit everything, and the other son's not to inherit anything, then it works. But if, for example, he wants to give everything to his next door neighbor, then that doesn't work. So according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, one way of reading it is that it means somebody who's in line to inherit. But according to others, it means, okay, we're going to see, the 2 options in the Gemara. It could mean he wants to give everything to someone who's supposed to inherit him anyway, or inherit her, but the person is promising everything just to one to the exclusion of the others. So now the question is, which one does he mean? And what did Tanakama really mean? Because what they're going to say now is Tanakama said, Ish ploni yirasheni b'mkom sheyesh bat, or biti tirasheni b'mkom sheyesh ben. The fact that Tanakama chose that case, but didn't talk about a son among sons or a daughter among daughters, leads the Gemara to say the following thing and infer the following inference. The example chosen by Tanakama was specifically someone else who's not the first one in line. There's a daughter and there's brothers, or there's a son and there's daughters, and the daughter wants to get instead of the person wants to give it to the daughter instead of the son, or the person wants to give it to someone else instead of the daughter. But from there, what can you infer? The fact that the Tanakama didn't use the case of ben abanot or bat ben abanot, ben abanim or bat ben abanot, a son among sons and a daughter among daughters, one can assume ben abanim, bat ben abanot, a son among sons saying, I want to give one son everything and the other son's nothing, or bat ben abanot, or this daughter, I want to give everything instead of the other daughters, farav kayamim. Sounds like it would be valid. But what's the problem? If you understand Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka to say that could be done, then they're basically saying the same thing. And that's what they say in a seifa. Well, look at the seifa. And they're assuming that Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka means exactly that. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, look, he says if it's someone who is ra'oi, who is worthy of inheriting, and what they assume he means is worthy of inheriting right now, not potentially if we get rid of all these other people, but no, the one who's in line to inherit right now. And if he said, I want you to inherit and you to get everything at the exclusion of the other brothers, or daughter exclusion of the other daughters, well, then Hainu Tanakama, then Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka and Tanakama are saying the exact same thing. So now we're going to suggest the obvious, which is maybe that's not what Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka meant. And then we have a disagreement, and we'll explain it right now. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, if you're going to say, and we always know if you're going to say always really is rejected. Achitema always comes with, but Can't be. If you want to say Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, afilu acher b'mkom badu, bat b'mkom ben kamal, when he said Ra'oi li'yarasho, maybe he meant someone who potentially is in line to inherit, but not right now, and then they can usurp it from, meaning again, the person who's bequeathing can decide they want to give it all to the brother instead of the daughters, or they want to give it to the daughter instead of the sons. And what he's saying is, we can do that. And Tanakama says, no, you can't. Well, it's not true that Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka says that. How do we know? Because his son, Rabbi Ishmael, said that he didn't say that. So let's read it inside. The Hatanya, doesn't the Braita say, Rabbi Ishmael ben Nosha, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer, Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, said, Lo nechleku abba v'chachamim al acher b'mkom badu bat b'mkom ben, shelo amar klum. They don't disagree about someone else who's in line taking it from the daughter or the daughter taking it from the son. No. Even Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, my father, said that doesn't work. Lo amar klum. Alma nechleku, what's the debate between them? Which is going to return us to really not understanding our Mishnah. The debate between them is al ben ben abanim u bat ben abanot. Sha'aba omer yirash, v'chachamim omrim lo yirash. He says the debate between the rabbis and my father was specifically about a son among sons, a daughter among daughters, and wanting to give everything to one of them. Now, he says, my father says that works, and someone can do that. And the rabbis say it doesn't, which makes sense. Okay, we could explain it that way, but what's the problem? The problem goes back to, how do we read the Mishnah then? Because the Mishnah said, right, Ish ploni yirasheni b'mkom sheyesh bat, which we inferred means specifically the rabbis gave a case of someone else rather than the daughter rather than the son, not a son among daughters, son among sons, daughter among daughters. If it was a son among sons, daughter among daughters, it sounds like Chachamim would say it works. But Rabbi Ishmael said, no, the rabbis disagreed about that. And said it doesn't work. So now we're a little bit stuck and we have to figure out. So we're going to have two resolutions to this. And that's why basically we're going to say, right, we're now back to where we started. Why did Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, have to explain on what were they disagreeing, the rabbis and his father? Because it seems like his approach, and this happens often where we have Tanaim arguing, and there's an argument about what they argued about. And we're now assuming the Tanakama, which is not the Tanakama in our Mishnah, don't get confused. It's not the unnamed opinion in our Mishnah. It's the unnamed opinion in the Braita where Rabbi Ishmael appears. Rabbi Ishmael says they disagreed about the case of ben abanim and bat ben abadot, son among sons, daughter among daughters. But the Tanakama on that Braita disagreed and said, no, that's not what they argue about. They argue specifically about what it looks like in our Mishnah. Ish instead of, right, someone else instead of the daughter, or the daughter instead of the son. And that's what they disagree about. But, right, and then we're going to say the following, right? That's what they disagreed about. But ben abanim and bat ben abanot, right, everyone agrees works. And that's the inference for Tanakama. And then it's explaining Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka a different way. Okay, it's explaining Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka as talking really about someone else instead of the daughter, someone else instead of the son. Ibait ema, second alternative, there's actually no machloket. Okay, so this explanation was there is a machloket. It's just not, the Mishnah is stated in a way that it doesn't agree with Rabbi Ishmael's approach. Okay, and that would explain our Mishnah in light of the right of Rabbi Ishmael, because our Mishnah just doesn't agree with Rabbi Ishmael, so there's someone else who disagrees with him. But now we're going to say it's possible you could explain that there's actually no machloket in the Mishnah at all. And Kule de Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka here, and this happens sometimes. We say that even though it looked like there were two different opinions, it's actually one opinion. And in fact, the opinion, it's missing words in the Mishnah, Chisur Machasra, V'hachi Katani, and this is how it should read. And it's all one continuum. Now, if you remember, we started with the Mishnah, we said one can infer from the first line the following. And then that was what created the whole problem, because what we inferred sounded exactly like Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. So to resolve this, what are we going to say? We're going to add the inference into the words of the Mishnah and transition into Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka through that. And you'll see in a minute. This is our Mishnah. Okay, we're just reading it from the beginning and we're going to add the words soon. He says, so-and-so is going to inherit me if there's a daughter. BT tirashen b'makom sheyesh ben. My daughter will inherit me in a case where there's a son. Lo amar klum. He didn't say anything. This person who tried to do this. Ha bat ben abano du ben abanim. But if there was a daughter among daughters or a son among sons, the daughters were supposed to inherit, or the sons were supposed to inherit, and the person, father or mother, chose one daughter to get everything or one son to get everything. If he says this, or she says, this person will inherit all of my property, that will work. Here, by the way, if you notice in the rewording, they say this explicitly. It was never said explicitly, but this is what it was in the Mishna. But now they're saying this is what it means. I want to give one all of my property. Instead of saying, I'm going to skip my daughters, give it to someone else, my brother, right? This is saying, I want to give all of my property to one of those people. And then we're going to now explain, why does this work? Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka amal im amar mishavroy liyashot v'arav kayamim. Why should this work? Because Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka's approach was, and this was all explaining Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, he holds that as long as it's someone who, right, who's supposed to inherit anyway, you can prefer one over the others. Okay, if you have daughters who are all supposed to inherit, or you have sons who are all supposed to inherit, you can choose one to get everything instead of the others. You can't choose a brother over the daughters, but you can choose a daughter over the other daughters, or a son over the other sons. So that's a second way to understanding the Mishnah. We have, again, two ways. Either there's a machloket between them, and then the machloket is specifically about, can you choose someone else over the person who's really supposed to inherit? Or you say they're all saying the same thing, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka is actually talking about son among sons, daughter among daughters, and wanting to give everything to one of the children. Now we're going to see that we paskel like Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. First, we're going to see it, the Babylonian amoraim, and then we're going to see the Eretz Israel ones also, the Israeli ones. And presumably, most of the commentaries think that we're talking about the second option, that it's ben abanim and bat ben abanot, and that's the way we paskin. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel halakha ke Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, v'chein Amar Rava halakha ke Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. So both Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel and Rava both say, right, very important, amoraim, say we paskin like Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. Amar Rava, my time into Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. Now we want to know what's the reason behind it. Amar Kra. The pasuk says, and this is the pasuk we've read a few times, I'll read it again. On the day when he gives his, he bequeaths his possessions to his son, at asher yeh lo, right, to what he has, lo, right, what all the possessions he has, lo yuchal levaker et ben ha'uval pnei ben hasnuah b'chor. He cannot choose one son over the other, the one who's not the bechor, to give him the double portion. Now, this is all about the double portion, not about inheritance in general, but we're going to learn some interesting things here. So the first thing we're going to do is find the source for our halacha, which is that you can choose one over the other. Now it says, "V'haya b'yom hanchilo et banav," on the day that he bequeaths his inheritance to his children. HaTorah natna reshut la'av l'hanchil l'chomesh yirtzeh. Now the drasha works on the word hanchilo. Hanchilo is he passes on an inheritance, bequeaths. But theoretically, it should just say, Vaya b'yom, and this happens automatically, the sons inherit. It's not that the father bequeaths as much as the sons inherit, because the father dies and it goes to the children. So why does it say hanchilo as if the father has an active role here? To which they answer, this shows that the Torah gave permission to the father, if he wants to bequeath to one over the other, he can be manchil to one of his sons to the exclusion of the other. Amar le Abaye. Now, Abaye comes in question, says, wait a minute. Now, first of all, one thing that I didn't mention before, but it's going to be very important. While I said that a father can decide, or a mother also, but you'll see the next part's only relevant to the father, but if a father decides to give all of his property to his son, while he can do that, there's one part that's not going to go to that son, assuming the son is not the bechor. If you remember, and this is why it's only relevant what I'm going to say to a father, because there is no pishnayim for a mother, for a firstborn of a mother. But when a father dies, the firstborn gets a double portion. Now that part you can't override. That's going to happen anyway. The double portion is going to go to the firstborn son. But the rest of it can be given to just one son. And that Abaye is going to say now, Amarle Abaye, why do you need to learn it from Vaya b'yom hanchilo et banav? Hami lo yuchal lavakir nafka. You actually can learn it from the pasuk that says, what we just read, you can't choose, and that's how we know that what I just said, you can't choose to give the pishnayim to a different son. You have to give it to the firstborn. So now, if you say lo yuchal lavakir, you can't give the portion of the firstborn to anybody else, the double portion. But wait, that would mean you can't give that, but you can give all the rest of the inheritance to whoever you want, because it's only a specific law by the double portion of the firstborn, which would imply that you could do it with anyone else if you want, though you could anything else you want, you can move all to one son. It's only the double portion that can't be given to the younger son. So you can learn the whole thing from Lo Yuchal Lavakir. Why you're learning it from Vayabi Yom Chilo Banav. To which the Gemara explains, the reason why this is, or maybe Rava answered Abaya's question directly and said, that pasuk is needed for the following Braita. And now we're going to have a Braita which explains why you need Lo Yuchal Lavakir and why you need Vayabi Yom Chilo Banav. We're going to come back full circle to where we started here, which is why you need both pasukim. Abba Chanan Amar Mishum Rabbi Eliezer. Abba Chanan said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer. We're now starting on the Amud Bet. Why does it say lo yuchal lavakir? Okay, why does it have to tell you that? Well, like, why would you even think that you could decide? If the law is it goes to the firstborn, why would you think that you could try to give it to somebody else, that they need to tell you you can't do that? Well, since you know, and this is, you can see this Braita goes like Rava said, which is from the words Vayabi Yom Chilot Banav, what do we learn? The father can choose to give it all to one son if he wants. Sheyachol, now once you have that pasuk, you might say V'halo dinhu. Well, logic would state that if the father can decide to give the regular portion, all the regular inheritance, all to one son, all the more so the pishnayim should be able to give it to whoever the father wants. Why is that? Because it's just logic. Okay, it's like a kal v'chomer kind of argument. Uma pashut sheyipak kocho shenotel b'ra'oi keb'muchzak. What we're going to set up right now is that the pashut is the regular portion. The regular portion is stronger. Okay, what's stronger about a regular portion than a firstborn? Well, you get not yipak kocho. It's much stronger. Your relationship as a son to the regular portion you're supposed to get is much stronger than the bechor to his double portion. Why is that? Because he's notel b'ra'oi keb'muchzak. We've seen this many times. Anything that is not yet in the possession of the father, but will come to the father after his death, like a loan or inheritance or anything like that, goes to all the heirs. And despite the fact that that gives them a very strong hold on the father's possessions, because even things that are ra'oi that aren't in his possession at the time, they can inherit. And in any case, from the words the Torah gave permission to the father to say, despite the fact that you have a very strong hold on this inheritance, the father could choose to give all of his possessions to one of you. So wouldn't you then logically say that a bechor shehura kocho, a bechor that already has a weaker connection to his double portion, sheino notel b'ra'oi keb'muchzak, he only gets a double portion of what's in the possession of the father at the time of death, not anything that's coming to the father later. Lo kol shekain, that the father could take it away from him because it's already not a strong inheritance as it is. Therefore, Talmud Lamal, that's why you need the pasuk lo yuchal lavakir, and that explains why you need that pasuk. And now we're going to say why you couldn't have learned it from there, also the other way. So now we'll see in a minute. So now the Gemara, the Braita that we quoted before, explaining why the pasuk lo yuchal lavakir is now going to say, okay, well, if you have the pasuk now lo yuchal lavakir, which teaches, based on what we just said, you might have thought the father could take it away from the bechor. Turns out he can't. Well, Yomar lo yuchal lavakir. So then why don't we say, let's just have the pasuk lo yuchal lavakir, which means you can't take it away from the firstborn. And this is kind of like the question Abaye asked. If you can't take it away from the firstborn, right, then what can you infer? But then you would infer then, if it's only the firstborn you can't take it away from, then you could theoretically take it away from any other son, right? You could give one son the rest of the inheritance over the other. In which case, which is the halacha, in which case, this is a bit of a circular. Then why do we need the first pasuk in that case? To which they answer, well, for the same logic we just said before, you might have assumed that she'achova lo dinu. You might have said, well, if you didn't have the pasuk vayabi yom achilo panav, you would say that from lo yuchal levakel, you would learn that ma bechor shehu rak kocho she'eino notel b'ra'oi keb'muchzak, a bechor is already weaker because he can't get anything that's not in the possession of the father. He doesn't get the double portion on the part that is not in the possession of the father at the time of death. And yet, even though he's weak, right, his hold on the property is weak, the Torah still said, we can't take it away from him, though. That firstborn, that double portion is going to him no matter what. So pashut shipa kocho. Well, you wouldn't say it's only bechor lo yuchal levaker, but everyone else you can change your mind, and do what you want with it. You would say the opposite. If the bechor was weak and yet you can't take it away from him, all the more so pashut, a regular son and his regular inheritance, shipa kocho, who actually has a much stronger hold on the property or on the inheritance, shenotel b'ra'oi k'muchzak lo koshaken. All the more so, he has such a strong hold on it, all the more so you would think you can't take it away from him. And it would have to be given to all the brothers equally, to which the Torah comes and says, that's why you need the pasuk, Talmud Lomar, where the Braita comes and says, that the Torah says, Vaya b'yom achilo panav, HaTorah natzna reshut la'av la'anchil l'chol mishir tzeh. The father gave rights to the son, right, to decide which son he wants to give it to. So the interplay between the two psukim teaches us, and we dealt with all the logic in between about what you might have thought and why you needed both psukim. But in the end, we have Vaya b'yom achilo means you could choose one over the other. However, even if you choose to give one over the other, the firstborn double portion is definitely going to that firstborn. And that is something that's not negotiable. And that's what we learned from the two psukim. And what the logic told us was why you couldn't have learned one from the other and why you actually need them both. And that answered the question that Abai asked Rava. Amar Rabbi Zreika, Amar Rabbi Ami, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Amar Rabbi. So now we have the rabbis in Israel that are passing down the Torah of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Halacha ke Rabbi Yochanan ben Uriah. So as I told you before, in Israel, they also held like Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. I think I said ben Uriah by Hexen. Halacha ke Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. Amar le Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba said, Hora itmar. So when Rabbi said it, he didn't say the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. He says he taught like Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. Taught meaning he ruled in a particular case like Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. So b'may kamiflage. What's the difference whether you say he said the halacha is like this, or he did an action based on it. He ruled based on it. Well, mar savar halacha adifa, umar savar ma'aseh rav. Some people think halacha is stronger. If you say the words, the halacha is like him, that's much stronger than acting upon it. Why? And that's why Rabbi Zreika said, the Rabbi said the halacha is this way. Because acting upon something could be, it was unique circumstances, who knows what. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do it in every situation. But if you say the halacha is this way, that's determining this is the way it is. And the other opinion, Rabbi Abba, said, no, ma'aseh is greater, because the fact that you say the halacha is like this might just mean, theoretically, you think that's that way. His opinion makes more sense to you, but it doesn't necessarily mean you act upon it. But if he actually rules in a particular situation like that rabbi, that is proof that he actually acts on his words and not just thinks about it theoretically, but practically speaking, we rule that way. And from here, we're going to get onto a very interesting discussion in the Gemara about how we rule and if, what is stronger, you're going to see. So the Gemara quotes a Braita right now. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Ein lemedim halacha, and this is a bit of a surprising Braita. We do not learn halacha, lo mipi Talmud, v'lo mipi maaseh. Okay, if we said before halacha is stronger or maaseh is stronger, this Braita is saying neither is good. Now, if that means how on earth are we going to learn halacha? But it's basically saying you can't learn it from a Talmud. Now, there's big disagreement what this means Talmud, right? It sounds like they're saying if someone says the halacha is this way. So the question is, how could you not learn halacha from there? So we're going to see in a minute what the Braita is going to say, but then we'll talk a bit about the commentaries and what they did with this. So you can't learn halacha not from Talmud, not from maaseh, not from actions. Ad shi'umru lo halacha l'maaseh. The person who's paskening has to say, we do this halacha l'maaseh. It's like combining halacha and maaseh together. So as we said before, this one thought halacha was stronger. This one said maaseh. practically we have to put them both together. Otherwise, if you don't say halacha l'maaseh, it could be you just thought it theoretically. It could be you just did it in a particular case. So neither is good enough unless you say, this is the halacha l'maaseh. That's what we always call it, halacha l'maaseh, right? Halacha l'maaseh, what do we do? It's like, the basic. So that works. So if you asked a question and they told you, do like this, you do it. But you can't start comparing it to similar situations and saying, oh, well, if they told me I could do it there, then I could do it there. And this also seems strange. And in fact, the Gemara is going to question this. What are you talking about? This is how we learn Torah. We're constantly, there's this situation, let's compare it to that situation. And let's learn from there to there, right? The Mishna is always giving cases. This case, and you're supposed to learn. Oh, then in another case that's similar. So how could you possibly say that? Amar Rav Ashi hachi kamar. So Rav Ashi is going to very much limit this statement about comparing. Now, before we get to Rav Ashi, I just want to point out, you can see why they say this, because maybe they're talking about not a knowledgeable halachic person. They maybe can make the connections, but a regular person might not make the right connection, or, well, the more so, this is a very big concern, often in situations, even if they say halacha l'maaseh, this is what you do, they might have been saying it particular for that situation, for you and where you're at and what it is. Right? Often, maybe you didn't understand the details of the case to start comparing it to a similar case. Maybe as a spectator, maybe you didn't understand what exactly was going on there. And that's a big concern always. So it could be that's what it means. But Rav Ashi says, hachi kamar, this is what they really mean. He said, this is only a halacha by treifa. Ditanya, as it says in a bright. Okay, what's a treifa? This is if you slaughter an animal and find out that it had some kind of blemish in the body that was going to cause it to die within 12 months. That's usually the definition, although we'll see when we get to Chulin, different opinions. That if it's going to die anyway, then that's not a kosher animal. Slaughter wasn't a kosher shechita, okay, because the animal was anyway going to die. So, and then there's a list in Chulin of all the different treifa. What makes it an animal a treifa? In treifa, you can't say if it had a cut. Okay, we're going to see the example. If you had a cut at the bottom of the leg, you can't say a similar cut at the top of the leg would also be a treifa. But don't be surprised. Now, you would think if it's at the bottom of the leg and it's a treifa, it causes to die all the more so at the top of the leg. So don't be surprised by that. It could be you have a cut at the bottom and it might cause them to die, but a cut at the top that looks like it would be worse maybe doesn't cause them to die. So treifa are very specific, and therefore you can't compare them one to the other, but other things you really could. Yeah, Amarle, we'll finish with this last line, and then we'll go back and discuss what we learned so far. Amarle Rabbi, in this section, Amarle Rabbi Asi the Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Asi comes to Rabbi Yochanan and says, Ki Amarle Mar halacha hachi navi maaseh. Rabbi Asi says to him, when you tell us, Rabbi Yochanan, this is the halacha in Shiur, you're teaching us, should we act upon that? Amar lo ta'avidu adam min halacha l'maaseh. Rabbi Yochanan said, no. Unless I say the words, almost like the magic words, halacha l'maaseh, do not act upon what I said. This is very concerning, right? We always say, what do you mean? We paskin halacha all the time. It says in the Gemara, the halacha is like this, the halacha is like this. So some of the commentaries say, okay, first of all the commentaries have a lot to say about this because if you want to read more, you can read up on commentaries about it. Because it's a little bit strange. Like, who said you have to say the magic words, halacha l'maaseh? So, first of all, some people say Talmud means Mishna. And when the Mishna, the rabbis in the Mishna, when they said halacha, they didn't really mean to paskin. The rabbis in the Gemara, when they said halacha, they did mean to paskin, or rabbis later. Okay? And it depends, what are you referring to? Referring back to the Mishnah, or are you referring to the later rabbis? Now, Rabbi Yochanan himself is a later rabbi. So, if you say that, you have a bit of a problem with Rabbi Yochanan. And I want to point out that there's a very interesting sugya it comes up twice in Gittin, and it's specifically with the same person, Rabbi Yochanan, and that might be another way to explain this, that maybe this isn't held by everybody. And it happens twice in Shas, and Rabbi Yochanan is the one who's always quoted as saying it, and it's a case where Rabbi Yochanan holds that the halacha is this way, and then he goes and acts differently, more stringently. And they say to him, each time it's somebody else who says, one time it's Rish Lakish, I forget who it is, in the other case, said, but Rabbi Yochanan, don't you say this? And Rabbi Yochanan says, just because we think that doesn't mean we act upon it. In other words, and this is, I know when I teach, people like to ask me, so what do we do practically? Especially we're in Yerusha laws, and what do we do? There are two very different things. One is the Beit Midrash world of understanding in depth all the different opinions. And then there's the halacha world, which is, okay, practically speaking, what do we do? And what you might think in the Beit Midrash, as this opinion seems to be the better opinion or stronger opinion, doesn't necessarily mean we're going to act that way in reality. And it might depend also on the situation. So that's really what this sugya is addressing. And it's a very interesting tension here between how do we kind of bridge those two worlds. And then they come up with this theory that, well, there's something called halacha l'maaseh. And that, when you say that, the rabbi meant we act upon it. But otherwise, you can't necessarily act upon what a rabbi teaches in the Beit Midrash. Even if he says the words halacha, which is interesting in and of itself. Amar lahu Rava l'Rav Papa, u'l'Rav Huna b'reid Rav Yoshua. So Rava says to Rav Papa and to Rav Huna b'reid Rav Yoshua, he says to them the following. Ki ata piska didina didi l'kamaychu. When a psak din of mine comes in front of you, v'chazitu be'pircha. I issued a ruling, and it comes to your table, and you're supposed to rule using that, and you have a problem, and you say, wait, something doesn't look right about this. Lo tikru adati tu l'kamay. Don't rip it up and say, oh, this is shtuyot, this doesn't make any sense, until I come before you. And when you see me, you can ask me your difficulties, and if I can resolve them, then great. And then you can uphold it, and that's why you shouldn't rip it. V'lo, and if not, if you ask me difficulties and I don't have a good answer, Hadran, then I'll change my mind about it, and then I'll rip it up myself. Okay, but you shouldn't take the luxury of just ripping it up on your own, because maybe I'll come up with an answer. We actually saw Rava a few dapim ago that he was willing to admit his mistake. But la'achar mita, okay, or not but what if I'm dead? And a psak din of mine comes to your plate, comes to your table, your court, and you want to rule based on it, but the problem is you have a problem with it. So now I'm not going to be back to answer any questions. I'm dead. Lo mikra tikruhu, umikmanami lo tigmaru. Don't tear it. On the other hand, don't use it in court. Why? Lo mikra tikruini di havayhatam dilma havamina chutama. Don't rip it up, because maybe if I were there, I would have given you an answer. Now I'm not here, but maybe there is an answer to the question. Maybe someone will figure it out, and then you can reinstate it and use it. Migmar nami lo tigmarumi. Now I'm now just going to the top of Kuf Lamed Aleph for a second. Also, don't use it though, and this is a very fascinating thing and very true. To aim the dayan ela masha inav ro'ot. A dayan can only do what makes logical sense to him. You can't rule in a case and say, oh, well, this rabbi said I should rule this way. I don't really believe it, but I'm going to do it anyway. You can't do that. A judge needs to understand his ruling and believe in it. And if you think there's a problem and you don't understand it, don't use it. So it's interesting because, again, Rava, who got up and had no problem saying I made a mistake, is also saying here, don't just follow me blindly, right? Think for yourself. If you don't like my ruling, so put it aside. Don't rip it up and discard entirely what I said, because maybe I would have a good answer, and maybe someone else can find a good answer, or maybe you can do some soul searching and come up with a good answer. But until you can, don't rule based on me, because you have to rule based on what looks right to you. And these are fascinating issues about Psak Halacha in general. So with that, we finished our daf. We're going to go back to the beginning with a quick review. If you say, right, that we now had this either machloket in the Mishnah between the rabbis and Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, or perhaps it was all Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka's opinion about, right, can the father prefer either a different relative over the one who's supposed to inherit, or a son among sons give all the possessions to one son other than, as we learned, the firstborn portion, the double portion, or a daughter among daughters. And maybe that's what Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka is saying, or maybe even the Tanna Kamma agrees with that. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka is going even farther to say someone else perhaps can inherit as long as they're in line somewhere, even though it's not their turn right now. They can bypass someone earlier on. Again, if the father chooses or the mother chooses to do that. Then we had, so we had different debates about who said what and what the different opinions were. Then we saw Shmuel and Rabbi who passed like Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. From there we got to what's the source. Then Abaye said, why isn't there a different source, right? We should have learned it from Lo Yuchal Bakir, and then we show why you need both psukim. From there, we got back to Psak Halacha because we had two different versions of what Rebbe said, Halacha or Maaseh. Right? Did he teach an actual, rule in a particular case? We talked about what the differences are and what the weaknesses of each of them are. And perhaps they're so weak that the Braita says neither is actually good, and you need the combination of the two, Halacha Maaseh. From there, we got off on a tangent about Psikat Halacha. With that, we're going to finish for today, wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.